Greetings, magical mavens. If you found your way to this channel, you're probably interested in the concept of cyclic living. But especially for those of us whose ancestors are not originally from the land we live on now, it can actually be quite challenging to feel a sense of belonging anywhere. Whether or not we're consciously aware of this sense of disconnect, it can affect the way we live our lives. Regardless of where you live or where your DNA is from, embracing a more seasonal living lifestyle can help us all feel more connected with nature. So I invite you to join me and my friend Flora Ware, ceremonial priestess, cyclical living speaker, author, pagan songstress, and the founder of EarthSong Temple, for a chat about cyclic living. We're chatting about how earth-based spirituality helps us experience more of a balanced life with a sense of belonging, how we can have multiple spiritual awakenings and reawakenings throughout our path and practice, how seasonal living can help immigrants and the descendants of immigrants to feel more connected with our ancestry, as well as the land we live on and the land we come from, the expansive power of perceiving the seasonal cycle as a spiral rather than just a circle, some musings about the ancient and modern origins of the sabbats on the wheel of the year, and how we use it both to honor the past and create a new future. How to feel connected with nature regardless of where you live. And Flora's holy trinity of cyclical living. Now, quick disclaimer, I apologize for the quality of the audio just when I'm speaking. Flora is going to be doing most of the talking and she sounds great, but unfortunately, Zoom decided to default to the crappy microphone that's attached to my webcam instead of using my good recording microphone. You can still understand what I'm saying, it's just not up to my usual quality. So brew yourself a cup of tea or pour yourself some wine, and I invite you to come sit with us for this cozy chat. Hey Flora, welcome to I think your fourth episode here on the Alchemy of Affluence podcast. It's good to have you back.
Yes, wonderful. Hello, Afura. I'm so happy to be back and talking about the Wheel of the Year.
Yes, so this is obviously my new series where we're specifically talking about seasonal living, seasonal manifesting, anything that fits into seasonal magic. And honestly, when I had the idea for this new series, you were one of the first people that I thought of, because when I think of the Wheel of the Year, I think of your beautiful music that you do for every season. And so I had to bring you on. So here we are.
Thank you.
So we're going to go into some questions specifically related to how you work with the seasons. So simple things at the beginning. What is your favorite Sabbath and why? Or do you have one?
Oh, that's an easy one. So Samhain is my favorite Sabbath, also known as Halloween, because my birthday is October 30th. So, even when I was a kid, I thought that I'd won the birthday lottery, that I got gifts one day and candy the next, I was like, yes. And then as I became more attuned to the Wheel of the Year and realized, oh, I'm a pagan and this is part of my spirituality, understanding the deeper meaning of Samhain as that really magical liminal portal, when the veils are thin between our world and the ancestors, and that connection to our ancestors, and also like death as rebirth really speaks to me as well as a Scorpio. So yes. And I would also say that a close second is really the opposite holy day of Beltane. So I really have a strong connection to those two Sabbats of Beltane and Samhain.
I love that. And it's true, you're such a Scorpio, and it's just so perfect. Like you really embody, and maybe this is why I thought of you for this series, because you really embody that concept of the cycle, that like life isn't linear, life is a series of cycles, and there's always a balance. Like to me, you're a very balanced person. I don't know if you hear that all the time, but to me, you're a very balanced person. Do you feel like working with the Wheel of the Year helps you to stay balanced, or is it that you enjoy working with the Wheel of the Year because you're a balanced person? Is it like a chicken and egg scenario?
I think it's the former. I think that earth-based spirituality does bring balance into our lives because it brings us into a relationship with nature, understanding ourselves as part of nature. And really, I see that's the biggest flaw, you might say, with modern thinking. And really, when I say modern thinking, I'm talking like the last 2000 years of more modern thinking, that we
Sort
are
of like
superior to
patriarchal
nature.
thinking.
Yeah, this idea that we're superior to nature or separate from nature has been really, ultimately, we're seeing it as our biggest downfall. So for anyone that has a natural connection to nature and then really embodies that relationship as far as spiritual practices, whether it's as simple as seasonal altars in the home or all out rituals and ceremonies with your coven to celebrate each of the sabbats. Everyone's got their own path. But yes, it really does bring not only that balance, but that deep sense of belonging and connection.
Yes, thank you for using the word belonging, because I think belonging is like one of my magical words for this year and probably into next year, because I think I'm getting more into it now that half the year is gone. But in this world where it just seems like there's so much craziness going on and so much what is the word I'm looking for? Again, like polarity as opposed to balance, right? But those things are similar but not the same, right? There's polarity and then there's balance. Where we live in a world where there's so much polarity, for those of us who are very spiritual, magical, wanting actual peace, it can feel like we don't belong. And so I think part of what drew me back to the Wheel of the Year in 2020, after sort of taking a break in 2019, was that the world needed balance, or my world needed balance at least. And so I was like, where can I find balance in this like unprecedented, and what are all the words they were using that year, like unprecedented, unpredictable, this, that, right? Which is what life is. We witches already know that, but we were really in it. And so I was like, oh, duh, the Wheel of the Year. It's always there waiting for us to come home to it. And it's not just about the cycle of the year, it's about that plant and harvest compost cycle. And it reminds us of that. And so for me, I was so grateful to come back home to that and realize that's right. Life isn't cyclical. Life isn't predicted by what's going on out there in the world. It's about our ability to relate to the cycle. And oh my gosh, I just feel like I'm on a completely different level now. Like, so have you ever had it? Because I know I've worked with you for many years and I've heard your story from way back in the childhood where you've kind of always been raised pagan. But have you ever had a point where you kind of fell off and then you had to sort of return to that simple cycle or return to the basics of your craft, like, and have a reawakening? Because like that was me in 2020 for sure.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And in fact, I think that first happened when I moved to the city to go to college. So, because I was raised in a more rural area. And so, fresh faced at 19, I go to the big city, going to college. And for quite a number of years, I still had that appreciation of like the moon and the seasons and the cycles, but I wasn't practicing it. I wasn't embodying it. I was just full on focused on my studies and being young and all that stuff.
College is a hard time to be spiritual, let me say.
Right. It was just, that was life. And I remember when it was like this incredible summer full moon on a beach, and a few of us had a spontaneous, it was like bonfire on the beach, and it's under the full moon, and singing. And it had just been years for me, and I remember that so strongly as like, oh my goddess, I need to really get back into this. And funny to come back around to this issue of belonging, that I just have always felt that I really belonged in this tradition and with earth-based spirituality. I'll never forget the first time that I saw the wheel of the year, that I saw our calendar as a circle. And it was this huge light bulb moment. And it just immediately made so much sense compared to the linear time of our Gregorian calendar. That was one of those huge moments. The other, pandemic, if I want to call it that, over the last few hundred years, we've of course had so much colonization and immigration, the big movement of our ancestors, for a lot of us from Europe to North America. And now, of course, we still are lots of migration from all different parts. So for those of us that live in North America and are not of First Nations, Indigenous descent, I really think, like, on a deep level, energetically, we do feel disconnected to the land that we live on. So we have that we can have that feeling that we don't quite belong here. And especially if we're not in any kind of rhythm or practice that connects us to the seasons, to the land. And so here we have millions of rootless people, spiritually and also ancestrally. So for anyone that's of Celtic origin, really that spans from Germany all the way to the British Isles, because the Celts were really a far-reaching group of people, thousands and thousands of years ago. So anyone that has a European and especially Celtic ancestry, working with the wheel of the year connects us back into that rhythm and helps us feel like we belong.
Yeah, and I can speak to the sort of other side of that too, like being someone that is European, African, and Native American. I can kind of see various perspectives on that, because like there's this part of me that feels like I connect with this ancient European calendar. And when I first discovered the Wheel of the Year, I didn't know my European ancestry. So I was like, ooh, what's going on here? Like, am I getting into some weird territory? What are people going to think? As it turns out, my mom is super into ancestry now, and it turns out we're 36% European and mainly of like Celtic and Nordic origin. So there's that. And then I also discovered, as expected, I am mostly African, but it's like, I think it's like 60 something percent and West African. So there's definitely some witchcraft going on in both of those. And then, Native American isn't always clear on ancestry tests, but there's always been a story in my family that we are part Native American and that I have a Native American great grandfather or something. So like for me, it is, especially living in the US right now, where there's so much division, so much weirdness around who and what I am as, a Black American witch of all the things, right? So I'm just like, okay, where do I belong? Where do I belong? And I've never felt like I honestly belonged anywhere except for in the forest by myself or surrounded by close loved ones and pets. And so this question of where do I belong is definitely part of what attracted me to the Wheel of the Year. And something that I teach is that regardless of whether or not you know that you have European ancestry, this concept of solstices and equinoxes, we just see that in every culture. Every humans appeared and they looked in the sky and they were like, something's going on. Let me document this. Let me base my life around this. Let me learn from this. And whether or not it's well documented, we can clearly see that like every culture has been obsessed with this. And so for me, I'm just like, as this person that doesn't actually have clear or obvious roots anywhere, I can say the world of nature is my sense of belonging. And you know what I mean? Like, I think I'm rambling at this point. That's what excites me about it. It's like, it doesn't matter where you're from or where you are or what's going on. You can look up in the sky and you can relate to this cycle somehow. It's just nature,
Absolutely. And that's fascinating. And I love hearing more about your story. So thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I've shared that very many times. But yeah, that's part of my witchy origin story, is that I don't belong anywhere, but I'm choosing to belong in the universe. And that's a very interesting path to kind of walk, because it's totally uncharted and unmapped. So yeah, so I guess I'm wondering, like, Do you feel like the wheel of the year is a map or like a almost like a life manual? Or do you feel like it's something that like are we informing it or is it informing us? Like this is a question that's been coming up recently, and I'm not too sure what my thoughts are yet. So now I'm asking people. Because I've heard the concept that like the concept of the circle of the year is limited. But the concept of looking at the seasons as a spiral where you're growing outward and upward as opposed to in a circle, you're kind of just adding that third dimension. And I've always thought of it that way, but I don't think I've ever done a great job of explaining that. So now I'm just like picking everyone's brain. Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I love that. And I'm all about spirals. So yeah, circles and spirals definitely are one of the oldest known symbols of the goddess and divine feminine energy, right? Along with the downward pointing triangle, as being the other one. Well, the idea of it being a map, I think, is accurate, that it does provide with some predictability, with some consistency. These are the things that we can expect at this time of year. But like we were saying earlier, life isn't entirely predictable ever. I think it's important, at least it has been for me, to remember that this really was simply a calendar for our ancestors. And again, maybe I'll just speak to my own, like certainly my Celtic Irish ancestors, this was really a calendar. And in the 21st century, I feel like we have this tendency to really want to, like, what is the deeper meaning of this? Like Beltane is a great example. And I learned to pronounce it in Gaelic, which is Bealtaine, when I was in Ireland in 2019. And I was like, well, what's the meaning of Bealtaine? And, all this, getting like really like examining. And then I find out that it means May. It's the month of May, which is why it's May Eve. Like the celebration is May Eve, and Bealtaine means May, and Lunasa means August. Like I was just like, oh, it's that simple.
Yeah,
It's a calendar.
We have a way of wanting to overcomplicate it, and we're like, oh, it means all these magical things, and there's gods and goddesses, and here's all our speculation. But when you speak to someone who's actually just in that culture, they're just like, oh, it's no big deal. It's this.
Yeah. And like you said, cultures all over the world, of course, since the beginning of time, have done whatever they could to essentially track time, whether it was noticing the moon phases or noticing the changes in the seasons. And certainly different climates had different ideas of seasons. But as far back as as really Babylon, and then even the ancient Greeks, they were really starting to accurately track the stars and astronomical events, right? This isn't astrology, this is actual astronomy. And so they could see when the solstices were. They started to understand, and there was that strong cross-quarter energy of the two solstices and the two equinoxes. And when I've done my research, most cultures, in fact, really had the 4 seasons, and it's at least in the northern hemisphere. And so I was fascinated to find out that it was more of the Anglo-Saxons and that whole culture, like pre-British invasion, that celebrated the solstices and the equinoxes, just like they had in ancient Rome and ancient Greece and all throughout Persia as well. They really celebrated those equinoxes and solstices. But somehow along the way, and I believe it honestly had to do with the climate, the milder climate of the British Isles and of Ireland, they were the ones that developed what we now call the fire festivals. So we're talking about Bealtaine and Lunasa, Samhain and Imbolc, which we now put as those in between of the equinoxes and the solstices.
But in
And
that
it was
culture, it was the main, those were the main ones, right?
those were the main four. They said they celebrated those 4 fire festivals. So when I was doing my research, I was really fascinated to find, well, how did 4 become 8? And it really happened with those early Wiccan influencers in the 20th century, like Doreen Valiente and Gerald Gardner. And, those people that you may have heard their names, because they were a bit on opposing camps. A few of them really liked the Irish Gaelic fire festivals and the names and the energy. The other people were saying, no, I celebrate the spring equinox, or I celebrate the winter solstice. And so they combined them in the 1960s.
Oh, okay. So this is a part of the story I haven't heard, because I always knew that it was during that time when people sort of decided, like, we're going to put all this together into this calendar, even though they weren't necessarily all originally put together. But I didn't know it was because there was sort of different perspectives and they just kind of merged it. Interesting.
Yeah, they did. They merged it. And so even though this modern idea that we have of the 8 sabbats and the wheel of the year is a more modern idea, the festivals themselves and all of the history behind them is very, very old and ancient. So it's kind of like a modern remix, if you will.
Yeah. I love it though, because it both respects tradition and it sort of creates space for inclusivity. It's like every culture has some version of these, so let's kind of just do it together, because none of us really know exactly where we came from or what they did. And so those of us who have a tolerant nature and want to be among others who are not necessarily just doing what the masses are doing, we might as well do it together. We're all different, but let's make it work. At least that's how I feel.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always say we honor the past while creating the future. And even with these practices, it's not about celebrating in the exact same way as our ancient Celtic ancestors. That really wouldn't be possible in a lot of ways.
There were like sacrifices and all kinds of nature that we don't have access to. There's all kinds of stuff.
All kinds of, and really the significance, the agricultural significance, which was really the strongest, like the foundation of this was really agriculture and taking care of the crops and taking care of the animals and knowing what time of year, like all of that, with a strong underpinning of society at that time. Even that is really lost to most of us that live in cities, that buy our food from grocery stores, that don't have a connection to the land, let alone even like, I don't know, a tomato plant in the pot on the patio. So we have to find ways to make these practices and the themes, and really we have to find ways to make earth-based spirituality relevant for us today.
Yeah. And okay, this leads to another question that I have. I love when I chat with you because we just go totally off the script and just start talking about everything, which is so fun.
Oh, what script? Yeah. What?
Yeah. But I honestly I love that because I'm a Gemini rising, so I enjoy spontaneous conversation. So, but one question I do have, and you did kind of sort of get into it a little bit, is the concept of gardening. So I know you live in Vancouver, and I know that's a beautiful place, but I know it's also kind of urban, I think. Maybe you can correct me on that. But I think I talked to you last year and you mentioned that you are doing a little bit of gardening. Am I making that up?
Well, yes. And so I don't live in Vancouver anymore.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, my wife and I moved with our young son back to, closer to my hometown. So I'm back in a smaller town.
Gotcha.
And we're not rural yet. We don't live on a homestead or anything. And yes, I am all about gardening.
Yay. Yeah. So I think maybe that was what you mentioned. You said you were getting back into some gardening after a long time of kind of not really having access. And I'm in the same, not quite the same, but I'm in a similar situation in that I do have a private patio that does get some light. So I have been gardening and I do have tomatoes that are about to be harvested. So yeah. But one thing I've discovered is that like where you live, not even just on the map, but the shape of your house or the shape of your complex can matter in how you experience the seasons. Because like 3 or 4 years ago, I lived in a different apartment that had a west facing patio with no awning. And I could grow pretty much anything there. I kind of wish I would have taken better advantage of the space, honestly. And here I only have east facing light and a 10-foot awning. So I am able to grow some things by just getting that, few hours of direct sunlight in the morning. But I'm completely blocked to south facing light. And then I get west facing light through my bedroom and my office. So I do get to experience two sides, but that's about it. And so I'm experiencing, like, even though I'm in the same climate that I was in when I had the other patio or when I had a big yard and grew lots of plants, I'm experiencing it both emotionally and tangibly in a different way just because of like the immediate environment that I'm in. So I don't even know if there's a real question in there, but I'm just curious, like as someone who's always loved the seasons and lived in an urban environment and now you're returning to more gardening, how has that affected your spiritual practice? Because I feel like for me, just the years when I didn't garden at all were not healthy for me. Like I didn't understand the nature of the universe and I got pulled off track. Whereas even now, if I'm just growing a little bit here and there, I feel like I'm more of a human being. Is this making sense?
I love that. Yeah, there's something really visceral when we are getting our hands in the dirt or just even like pruning our tomato plants, and we feel that. So I can appreciate that. And yes, I was able to still feel connected when I lived in the city, but it takes more work. That's really what I want to say. It's not that it's impossible. That's not at all. I definitely encourage, anyone can live anywhere and have this connection. But I guess my own experience, I did have to work a little harder being in an urban center. And yes, someone else listening is probably thinking Vancouver is like the greenest, most nature-based city, if you do happen to know it. I'm like, I know. I lived in we're surrounded by mountains and the ocean, and it's beautiful. And that's probably why it was the only big city I could really live in. But now where I am, just the pace of life is slower, in a small town. And it's like, I know where the moon rises over my mountains. I know where the sun sets. I know, I feel it. We develop relationships even with certain trees at different times, right? And it's like we can watch this tree, unless it's an evergreen, I guess, but we can watch the tree go through the changing seasons. Like I just this morning I was noticing the maple that's across the street, and I was like, wow, it's almost entirely yellow. It's just like it's the first tree in the neighborhood that starts changing colors in its leaves. And I know that by now. Like I have a relationship not just with trees in general, which I do, but it's like I have a relationship with that tree. I drink my morning tea and I'm always looking at that tree. So it doesn't matter what month it is. It's like I can look at that tree and know what time of year it is.
Yeah, same here. Interestingly enough, I live in like a suburban but very like industrial environment. There's a very busy street and all that. But what's nice is that there are at least a decent amount of trees. So I can stay connected to birds and trees and those kinds of things. And interestingly enough, the tree directly in front of my patio is the only tree in Western New York, at least to me, that actually turns orange in August. So, like, to me, that is the tree. That's it's like that tree. I know what's going on. He's going to be the one that shows us that autumn is coming, and then the rest of them will follow. So, my question for you is that we can ramble about the magic of how it feels to be in the seasons and how it feels to be connected to nature all day. But like, how do you actually translate that into something that your clients and your audience can use to feel again that sense of belonging or that sense of yeah, that the universe is our place, whether we fit in with greater society or not. Like, what do you want your audience to know when they're working with the seasons?
Mm. So I've come up with what I, tongue in cheek call the Holy Trinity of cyclic living.
Ooh. That sounds fun.
And so for me, yeah, the Holy Trinity is inspiration, ceremony, and embodiment. So inspiration for me is often music. You mentioned my songs for the Wheel of the Year album. And I'm not the only one out there that's put out music specifically to these holy days or, celebration of this season. So when we want to feel connected into these energies, what inspires you? If it's not so much music, then maybe it's art, or maybe it's poetry or writings. And so when I'm sharing things for inspiration, I really pull from the artistic realm that can really speak to the energy. A painting of a goddess that really speaks to the energy of the autumn equinox as like the harvest queen can speak to us so much more than even words can, right? They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, that kind of thing. So inspiration. Ceremony is really fundamental for me, and I host online ceremonies 8 times a year, and I encourage people to get together with people in their communities, so, or even bring ceremony into their families. There's things that you can do to honor these dates, or even, it doesn't have to be the specific date, but close to it or in that season in some ceremonial way, bringing that sense of occasion and that recognition through something that is out of the ordinary. That's a ceremony, right? That's sacred space. That's the second thing. Then we get to embodiment. And embodiment is, of course, a really lived experience of very like being in the practice of, again, whatever the season is. And for me, it's altars. It's how I'm eating seasonally. It's working with specific goddesses that I feel are very associated with that time of year, having that kind of energy invocation, again, on my altar, maybe an image or a symbol that I'm working with that relationship. There's a lot of different ways that you can bring it into your embodiment. Get out, sit by that tree. If you have that sit spot in nature, something, even if it's just journaling, but you're taking the time to really dive into it and I feel like I'm repeating myself, but like, how do you just embody it? How do you really embody it rather than just thinking about it?
Yeah.
How are you actually putting something into practice?
Yeah, and I think what I love about your work is especially the concept of community and ceremony. Like, I think what we're lacking in society is ceremony. And I think it doesn't exactly make sense to explain. Like me being an air sign and wanting to explain exactly why ceremony is so important, it's difficult to quantify. But when you experience it, like even just being on a podcast call with a soul sister or whatever, like that can be a little bit of a ceremony. Like, what do you think it is about ceremony that actually, in a tangible sense, makes our lives better? Maybe you can describe that a little bit better than I can.
Well, I agree so much that we are lacking ceremony so much in our society, in our Western society. We're also really lacking that sense of that sacred community. Now, ceremony can be personal. So I want to make that clear. You can have a very powerful solo ritual ceremony. But then when you engage in ceremony in community, even if it's 5 people, 50 people, or 500 people, right? It it simultaneously elevates the experience and then also really anchors it in our lived experience. So with so many people in the last 100 years leaving church or no longer going to mosque or synagogue, freeing ourselves from that really restrictive dogma, if you will, right? Which has been wonderful to liberate ourselves from that. And at the same time, it's really left a gap in our lives, and really that our souls yearn to be in that sacred space in community. And so if you find or you create a community or a small group of people that you can engage in ceremony together, it's like you said, we can't really talk about it. Go and experience it. And then you tell me how it changes your life, because it will.
Absolutely. So how do your ceremonies work? Because I know there's witches and pagans and magical people all over the world who don't necessarily feel like they can walk out their front door and be in ceremony with other people, because people don't get it. There's a lot of muggles around, So how do you virtually create that energy of ceremony for people?
Yes. So I host mine on Zoom, and it always is a very international gathering, which is such a wonderful opportunity that we have with Zoom, despite the downfalls of the tech. So it's an international gathering. And, my unique flavor is, I don't consider myself a traditional Wiccan, but I definitely lean on the more divine feminine side of things, while at the same time remembering to always come into balance, honoring the sacred masculine at the same time. And I really focus on bringing in a sense of sisterhood and ceremony through guided visualization, right? Guided meditation, ritual, and song, right? Again, I'm repeating myself, but as a pagan songstress, for me, music and poetry really brings us into that beautiful sacred space. And it's one of my favorite things to bring into a ceremony.
And I love that about your ceremonies, because I've been to many ceremonies, but your songs just kind of embody anything that you could have tried to say in words without the music would have been hard to explain. Once you put it to music with your just beautiful lyrics and voice, it's like, then you can kind of take it again internally. You can take it into your body and kind of feel it more so than just understand it. So thank you for being here. So where can people find you if they want to join your next ceremony or anything else that you're offering right now?
Oh, well, thank you, Afira. My website's floraware.ca, because I am up in Canada. So floraware.ca. And you can also find me on Facebook, Instagram. I am always so happy to hear from people. So if anyone wants to reach out to me directly, email, or just, find me and wants to say hi, please do. I'm always happy to chat with sister witches.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being here, Flora. And I'm definitely sure chat with you another time, because you're a regular here on the podcast.
Oh, yay.
See you next time. Bye.
So, magical mavens, how do you feel about the topics we touched upon in this conversation? I would love to know what your experience has been with cyclical living, feeling a sense of belonging on planet Earth, or literally anything else that this conversation may have sparked in your mind. I invite you to let me know in the comments. And for more seasonal living magic, I invite you to check out this playlist right here.